Maggie Jackson is another underachiever. A graduate of Yale University and the London School of Economics, Maggie is an award-winning columnist and author of the recently published book, Distracted: The Erosion of Attention and the Coming Dark Age. Today, Maggie guides a panel of thought leaders and provokers through our next conversation. It all comes back to innovation, the new paradigm of play.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I hope we're having fun, because we talked a lot about play today, and learning as well. And it was a great morning. I think there are a lot of both conflicting and inspiring statements and conversations started, as we can see by the tenacity of people from coming to staying with the conversations in the hallways. The UN Human Rights Commission designates play as one of the fundamental rights for children. But what form will it take in the future? How will play evolve? Where will it unfold? I think these are threads of questions that we've heard this morning and that we'll try to tackle in this panel. The dictionary defines paradigm as an example or a pattern, quite simply, but it's not simple at all. What is the new paradigm of play? This is an absolutely crucial question for all of us, no matter how grown up we are. So before we begin, I'm going to introduce the panelists, but I'm going to throw out some questions that I think perhaps we should consider as we discuss this context and evolution of play. First, in a nutshell, in a word, freedom. Human life is a balance between the active, the passive, between being a spectator, being a participant, between freedom and between fetters. So this is a crucial question for parents, kids, adults, toy makers. Will children be creators or not? And both have a role. I mean, there's a role in the world for listening and for speaking. David Byrne, the musician, once said, facetiously probably, PowerPoint, quote, tells you how to think. This can be an enjoyable experience. I hope we don't have too many Microsoft people in the room. But this idea of our relationship with the machine, which is part and parcel of our relationship with technology, is extraordinarily important. And as Diane Levin, the educator, says, do toys today have a problem-solving deficit disorder? Or are kids' agendas, thoughts, etc., being shaped or not by the new types of toys that we're seeing? And also, do our own parenting habits create hyperstructures that shape and set the agenda for children and play? So freedom is a word I think we need to discuss. Second, what is the context of play? I mean, we have been talking about an expanded stage of human life. We've broken or shattered new boundaries. The 19th century was the railroad shattering physical distance. Now we truly inhabit alternative virtual realities that are not so alternative anymore. It used to be the virtual reality was a game with a headset and a joystick. Now, we really are in an era of real virtuality, as Manuel Castells says. This changes the number of ties we have to the people in the world, which has tremendous implications for both adults and children. It changes how we operate, where we operate, how we use our imaginations. And we're also on the move. This is part of the context of play. Yi-Fu Tuan, the cultural geographer, says, calls place a realm of pause and space a canvas for movement. And we have chosen space. So is play going to be in 2030, 2040, 2050 an activity that's half-focused and always hurried? I see so many kids walking down the street playing. And play can always be mobile and active, but maybe we're dealing with a different kind of mobility when it comes to play. So these questions speak to the role of the toy in future children's play, as well as the nature of play. And just in my last observation I'd like to share is of the historian David Nye, who calls tools and machines parts of systems of meaning. He says, like stories, the use of tools involves altered circumstances, controlling an outcome, and the passage of time. And ultimately, the meaning of a tool is inseparable from the stories that surround it. So today, we have some wonderful storytellers who can share some stories, and I'd like to hopefully have time to open this up to discussion about play and toys and hear your stories. Alice Cahn, to my right, is Vice President of Social Responsibility for the Cartoon Network. And her responsibilities include directing content and the implementation of outreach and pro-social initiatives across all of the Cartoon Network divisions. Larry Hitchcock is the CEO of KidThing, which he created as a safe digital media platform to engage his young daughter and many, many other young people out there. Deborah Linebarger is Assistant Professor of Communication in the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. And her research focuses on the relationships among children's developmental status, their use of media, and the larger social worlds. And finally, Kathy Hirsh-Pasek is the Stanley and Deborah Lefkowitz Professor in the Department of Psychology at Temple University. She's the director of the Infant Language Laboratory at Temple, and her research involves the areas of early language development and infant cognition. She's the author of Einstein Never Used Flashcards. So I think we'll start with Deb, and the panelists are going to make some remarks, and then we'll pose some questions and talk. And I think I'd like to ask you about how media can help play. I mean, what are some of the guidelines, and how and when do we shape media as a tool, and when is content important? Some of the guidelines that you've seen in your research.
Well, there are certain features that we know are critical when you're playing, regardless of what you're playing with. And so I conceptualize media as a tool, just like you have books and blocks and puzzles and all of those things. And in watching kids play, I have a small litter of children myself. And with the older two, they're 15, 11, and then 2 and 6 months, or 7. I don't know, it's kind of blurry because the one won't sleep through the night. With the older two, I remember thinking, I have to get all this stuff because they need to have this and that so that they can, move ahead, and they need this kind of educational media, and otherwise they're going to be behind, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm glad that certain products weren't available when they were babies, because I would have been completely sucked into the vulnerability that parents feel when they see products labeled in certain ways. So with the younger kiddies, I have a less is more attitude, and it's probably a good thing because there's no more room in our house for all of the gazillion things that you want to give your kids. So in thinking about that and thinking about what's good and what's not, there are certain features of a tool that you would want to use to support play. So there are things like having open-ended, the ability to be open-ended in the kinds of tools that you're using. And media can do that well and not so well. So you really have to sort of explore what you're using there. It gives them also the opportunity to explore, to use it in different ways, to encourage flexibility. It should be non-linear. I worry often about the drill and kill kinds of software or online games. Those are left over from the worksheet days in early elementary school when you're trying to do your math facts. It also should allow you to experiment with variability in the way you manipulate things. So a lot of these simulation kinds of things you can find online. My 15-year-old a few years ago was doing a project on volcanoes, and I think it may have been the Discovery Channel had the coolest simulation thing with volcanoes. So you could do all these different things and see if you could get the volcano to explode. It also should allow them to take risks. So as kids are developing and getting older and trying on the different hats, particularly with adolescents, you want them to be able to use media that allow them to try different things, simulate things, see what happens to people if you, the newest thing they've been playing with is Spore. And so my 15-year-old can't get very far. I think his character didn't make it. And then you want sustained engagement. And this is something that's problematic not only when you're playing with toys, but you see it in schools, you see it in childcare environments. They give you 30 minutes for free play, and that's simply not enough time. Especially for very little kids, they need at least an hour to really sort of get into things and get to those deeper levels of engagement. And what we find, especially in households that use a lot of television, is the TV's on all the time. It's in the background, and that kind of background exposure is really problematic. There was a new paper released in the latest edition of our research journal, Child Development, on the role that background television plays in interfering with the way that kids play. And so also these tools shouldn't be contextually bound, so there should be opportunities. I sort of liken a good media tool similar to the kinds of artwork that your kids bring home in childcare. So do they bring home the bunny model that looks just like what the teacher did? Or do they bring home nothing because they had shaving cream all over the table and they were really getting in there and playing around? And, you know, because what does the I have leftover angst about the bunny model because I could never do it in elementary school, and I don't like art now from that. But anyway, so let's move into things that allow them to process. So media is not necessarily a problem if it can do these things that we already know really support play and later development.
Great, wonderful. And I know the work I think you're talking about is from Dan Anderson's lab, yes. And he also found that when there's he and his colleagues found that when there's background TV going on in the family life, parent-child interaction goes down, something like 20 to 25%, which is really important. So those are great comments on the context of play, and I like your bunny model. Kathy, can you discuss a little bit further about how play is essential to learning? But what does the toy, particularly the digital or technological toys that we see out there today, contribute or not to what children need?
Well, I should first tell you that I really come to you as a scientist here, so I'm just going to tell you what our efforts have been in trying to figure out what the real educational toy is, because I think it really gets to the question that you've asked. And we have 40 years of amazing research in child development that I think, when married with a lot of what you do, can produce incredible products. So I don't think it has anything to do, I so agree with Mitch, I don't think it has anything to do with whether it's electronic or it's not electronic or the medium that you use. It's how you use the medium that's going to be really important. And I think that that's what you're hearing many child psychologists talk about today when Ed Ziegler screams play is under siege. The father of Head Start said that because we don't have time for play, and parents don't even know what play is anymore. And so I just want to make a quick point there, and we could come back to it, that some of our studies suggest that parents have now been convinced by some of the industry that, oh my God, if I have this fear, then I have to be having my kids do these glorified electronic worksheets, and that must be what play is because my child will never get into Harvard if they don't. So I think we all have to relax here, and I come to you as a mom as well, and I should say, I do have a Wii. It's mine, not my kids, so I really love it. I love the Wii. But anyway, so what I did for you, just to help flesh this out, was I came up with sort of 6 principles that I think we could safely say would have complete consensus in the child development literature, and that I think if we paid some attention to, and you've heard a lot of these before, would do well to help us marry the toy industry with what's going on in developmental research. So the first, you sort of heard already, but it's promote active, not passive learning. And really figure out what you mean by active. And so I throw out this for your consideration, that a toy should be 90% child and 10% toy. not 90% toy and 10% child. And the glorified worksheets that are aiming to teach everybody something tend to be more toy than kid, the kids just filling in the blanks. The second, boy, you've heard this now from so many people, even in the 8 to 12 range, they got to be flexible. Kids have to be able to do more than one thing. I've seen so many toys come out where they do one thing and then the toy's put together, done, okay? And then the box is more interesting than the toy, which gets at Deb's point about sustainability. So my principle, too, is please, please do things that do more than one thing. Create them. 3, invite social play. Especially for the under 6 crowd or under 7 crowd, playing with someone else is really critical, and they learn as much by playing with other people as they do from any toy. So please don't get duped into thinking that we can teach like social interaction on a television. I'm sorry, Deb, but it's really hard to do because at least with little guys, it takes that kind of give and take. And just to do one little plug here, I mean, Evie did such a nice job of explaining that to parents, and I think we need to help parents understand that real people matter. Principle 4, boy, you've heard this a lot, spark creative innovation and imagination. That's what toys really need to be about, and I am so thrilled when I saw the Harris polls that, my God, it's important to kids too, so that is like way cool. Principle 5, make it real. Because kids have to feel things. I mean, they learn things by, piling up stuff and feeling the angles and feeling the weights. And principle 6 is don't promise what you can't give, or can't deliver. So please, guys, take brain growth off of the packaging. It just needs to be off of the packaging. That language learning can be done by some televised thing below the age of 3. The research just does not support it. Bilingualism in a mobile, doesn't happen. So, will the real educational toy please stand up? I'd like to suggest to you just 2 closing remarks. One is that there are real educational toys out there that are amazing, like blocks, and that's what the American Academy of Pediatrics said, because believe it or not, in some of our studies, children are learning very complicated language skills, math skills, balancing skills, and physics by playing with blocks. I mean, who could believe? And so I think we have to return to some of those real toys, and that go and watch kids. And please get your designers to go and watch kids. And the example comes here from Fisher-Price, who at one point, after many years, sent the designers to go out and watch kids. And Play and Learn was born from that. And they were a little afraid that maybe it wouldn't cut it because it's not educational enough. But in fact, I mean, kids love electronics. They love to turn on and off lights. Any of you have kids know that, right? They love this stuff. My kids could spend all day turning on and off lights. So the real educational toys are the ones where they explore, they're engaged, and where we use these developmental principles. And people in our field, like me and Deb, we're willing to help you figure out those rules because the research is pretty darn clear. Thanks.
That's great, a great point. So this is why my husband takes over the sandcastle building when we go to a beach. I mean, he's much more into it than my kids. But I think you also raised a really important point that no one, I think, has mentioned. I mean, we mentioned reality, we've mentioned traditional, we mentioned wooden spoons, but I think there's a huge role to play for the sensory. And therein, again, lies the balance between a world of virtuality and a world of the physicality. Are we earthly? It reminds me, I believe, the Chinese, I'm not going to get this right, but ideas of the world is, air, fire, earth, and water, and do we need all of this to balance? And are we of the earth anymore? And I also think the absolute obsession we have with brain science comes from our increasing tendency to think of our bodies as just machines that drive our cognition. So those are great points. And Alice, could you talk a little bit about play and learning and pushing kids too far, too fast, and perhaps the role of humor?
Is there any way to turn those lights down?
Yeah, really. Oof.
I guess not. There is? Oh, that'd be swell. They're a little scary. And I love that the ladies' room is right there. So the punctuation is perfect. It's a little scary to have been asked to talk about sort of the next crowd up from preschoolers, sort of 6 to 11s, which I've broken out into 6 to 8s and 9 to 11s in a room full of developmental experts. So if I get anything wrong, if you could wait till after the panel is over to tell me, that would be much appreciated. But the younger sort of edge of that age group, they're real concrete thinkers, and they can fantasize. They're great at fantasy role play, but the dumbest mistake you make as a parent is to say, "What if? What if you bit your brother? Wouldn't you know?" They don't get it. It's like, no, I bit him because I wanted to. I didn't really think about the result. They like rules, they like routine, and it's not because they're robots, but it's because they really want to play independently. And knowing the rules and having that kind of set aside allows them to then fantasize and have all this great creative play without worrying what the rules are, even if they make up the rules themselves. Their senses of humor are also developing, and verbal humor has joined, finally, farts and burps and other people falling down as sources of real amusement. And they finally get the knock-knock jokes they've been telling you since they were 3, which is great. And they finally get the classic joke, "Why did the man throw the clock out the window?" Which is lovely. Their older siblings can reason more competently. They can make logical decisions based on data. They don't usually do that, but they are capable of doing it. They are now in school seriously expected to read to learn, not be still learning to read. And the scariest part, I think, of getting older is that the social networks are becoming established. And being popular has reached the understanding of, in order for someone to be in, someone has to be out. So it's getting a little bit painful. Life is getting harder. Their worries are getting bigger. And as parents, we go into protective mode. They worry, we worry, and we really shouldn't. We should just butt out. We need to leave them alone to figure out things for themselves. Like Deb, I have this bizarre age spread in my children. My oldest daughter is 28. My youngest son is 6. Doesn't say much for my planning. But over the last 30
Says a lot for your flexibility.
Yeah.
I'm just jealous.
Well done. Well done.
But I have watched over the last 30 years parenthood morph into a competitive sport. We are so afraid our children won't have a place in this competitive world, and we are so eager to provide them with every experience, every group, every class, every lesson, every toy. And interestingly enough, for this sort of 6 to 11 age group, the box the toy came in still has enormous possibilities for play. We would just do better to sort of back off sometimes and let them do it. And you ask yourself why, as parents, we don't do that more often. And I think one of the reasons is that we're afraid. And we have good reasons to be afraid. It's impossible to go on a news site or look at a newspaper or watch the news and not see some horrific story about some child that's been abused or hurt or lost. Those are real stories, and they are horrible stories, but they are also, for the most part, in our everyday lives, the exception. And beyond worrying about our children's physical safety, we're so afraid they won't be happy. We're so afraid they won't succeed, that they won't find a place in the world. These are fears that our parents had, that our grandparents had, but seem to have risen to a fever pitch over the last couple of years. This has been said before in this room and in other places, but we need to let our children fail. We need to let them experiment and not feel like a product has to come out of it. We need to learn the lesson of the skinned knee, and if you haven't already read Wendy Mogul's Blessing of the Skinned Knee, it is an amazing book about the importance of play and letting our children be who they are, not who we want them to be. I really appreciate, I heard this morning that Google doesn't have Google Kids, and that there is no Google Junior Earth site. Kids are intuitively interested and facile with technology, and they are, for the most part, more unafraid than we are of trial and error. They can figure out how things work on their own, and we need to let them, in the same way that they can figure out what to do with an empty refrigerator box, 4 Sharpies, and a roll of tape. Our children have more monitored activities than they know what to do with. And I think the best thing we can do as media makers is turn them loose with good tools, or tools they find themselves, to create their own games and to just let them play. And just one shameless plug, if you go on CartoonNetwork.com, we have a great game creator site that, not Scratch, Mitch, but we're working on it. But it's been amazing to me. The site's been up for less than 3 months. There are over 1 million games posted that you can play. So that's
great. Yeah, and I think that the whole, again, parenting, the environment, the sort of milieu that they're growing up with, the context has as much to do with their experience as the toy itself. And these are really important points. And I think that, was the Black Death or highway robbers or the medieval ages or any time in history more dangerous than ours? No. I think we are in a society, and have been for hundreds of years, that thinks that it can manage risk. We want to control and manage the risk related to our children, but it's getting to the absurd points. So last but not least, Larry Hitchcock. And I guess I asked him to go last because both Alice and Larry are in the marketplace, and so I just wanted to hear from him about the market pressures, or the pressures facing someone who's creating as an entrepreneur, some, not really a toy, but a toy space.
Sure. Well, and I'm not nearly as qualified as many of the august people in the room in terms of the specifics of child development. My qualifications are I've been in the technology business for a while, and I'm a dad. And I have only one child, so every day I'm a first-time dad. Every new day brings new things. There are, I think, a lot of commercial pressures that exist that industry tries very hard to accommodate the knowledge and the science and the research and the observation of watching kids and testing out toys with kids. There are a lot of things that are very sticky, very financially successful, that don't fall into some of these sort of bins that seem to be either very learning, very engaging, and kind of following the higher thinking, and it's a constant battle. Certainly, as an entrepreneur that's started a company as opposed to working in a bigger industry that's got a more substantial market base, it's a constant daily choice to be picking things that seem to be very commercially viable, yet have more, hollowness to them, versus things that are very rich in their experience and their learning capabilities. That may not have the same commercial return to either your investors or your shareholders. And that's a hard line, and I was at the Sandbox Summit in Las Vegas last year, and there was a lot of discussion about how does industry kind of manage some of this? How do we figure out a way to incorporate the research in a way that is commercially viable? Because for us, that's how we get measured. We know it's great to build a product that has a tremendous amount of play activity, learning activity, and all of the ancillary benefits that are pretty obvious to lots of parents and teachers and researchers. How do you do that in a very commercially viable way when the realities of the marketplace are what are staring in front of you? And it's a daily challenge. What we did at Kid Thing was to try to build a platform that it kind of encompasses everything from the pure play, digital learning blocks, things that are far more, educational based, or even kind of the pure drill and kill math games, and have a broad spectrum. I think one of the things that's very important for parents to do, and this is what we imbued in what we've developed, kids need to have independent choice. I mean, if you take technology out and you take before computers and before digital learning games and everything, parents picked a whole bunch of stuff, put it in the kids' room or the family room, and said, go play with this, from the refrigerator box to the blocks to a book to just sitting down on the floor with them. But then the kids made their own independent choices. They looked at that pile of stuff, and they themselves learn about themselves, learn about their interests, learn about what they want. That's a lot of what we've tried to do in the platform that we've built, as opposed to kind of taking a pure computer game environment and saying you start here and you end here, and it's however many hours of experience there is. Mm-hmm.
Great, wonderful. And I'd just like to ask maybe two panelists, whoever wants to, just to say a further word about the role of parents, because the idea that kids do live in this circumscribed world, no matter where you fall on the debates of how overscheduled they are, I think we can see that there are incredible boundaries placed. And, you know, one amazing thing to me is just to read children's literature. There's never a parent. And it seems so ironic and hypocritical in some ways. You know, Ramona and the rest of the tribe of classic children's characters are just all out and about doing things. Maybe, I'm not saying that to be nostalgic, but it is really gives you a sense of how things have changed. So would you like to, Deb, say a word about that?
One of the things that we've been doing at Penn is looking at all of the kinds of claims that various educational products make and whether or not parents interpret them differently. So if you put on there, this is going to grow your child's brain by 25%, or, you know, playing with a ball has been shown to grow your brain 25%. Do parents interpret that differently? And also try and figure out a way to say, hey, relax, take a breather. You don't have to start at age 1 getting your child ready for Harvard. And in fact, it's probably better not to go crazy. And then the final point is there are some great products aimed at the younger set, but the key is parents need to hang out and do it with their kids. So if you're watching, let's say, a DVD, and there are 2 in particular that do a great job of this, and there's research now that shows it does impact the way that parents play with their kids. So the one that Kathy mentioned is E.B.'s Adventures, and then the other one is the Sesame Beginnings. And what they do is they model really good parent-child interaction, which we know is the key, especially for the youngest set. And so if we can design things that can serve a dual purpose and make parents feel better about the fact that all they're pulling out is the laundry or the pots and pans, that's wonderful. They don't need to run down and buy something that has little genius, or I'm trying not to isolate or single out anybody who does that, but using words like that again get to the vulnerability of the parents.
Right, that's great. Anyone else like to? Kathy?
Well, there's so much research out there, especially on the 0 to 6. So I just first want to put out there that parents are really important. So if you have kids, this is great news. Anyway, I found it was great news. And when we look at just the percentage of how children respond socially or how they respond emotionally, the percentage that's due to how you parent and just parents being there. And I'm not saying you should quit your jobs, run home, be barefoot and in the kitchen. None of us were. But those interactions really account for tons. Even if you have your child care, by the way, your child in child care for 40 hours a week, parents totally trump how your kid will come out. Isn't that amazing? So parent interaction is absolutely central, and there isn't a developmental psychologist who wouldn't tell you that. So that raises, I think, one of the key issues that you're asking, which is how do we best help parents see what I call the extraordinary in the ordinary? And what's happening is that quite often parents are getting the wrong messages from all of us. They're getting the messages that they have to play with this, or they have to do this, or they have to be in the activity that Alice is talking about, or their children will fall behind. And quite the contrary, because, as I mentioned before, things like blocks, we've actually compared, learning math from things that are high-tech, from learning things, this is with the 0 to 6, okay, so I just want to be clear about the age group here, to what they learn from blocks. And it's amazing how much they learn from blocks, okay, in mathematical prep.
There's a block theme arising here.
Well, it doesn't just have to be blocks. I mean, as I say, it doesn't matter whether it's high-tech or it's low-tech, and I really want to be clear about that. I saw wonderful things when I was in Disney World last. We were waiting in lines forever, and they had this real cool social cooperation game that was very Wii-like. And all the people standing in line, me and my kids, we were all trying to make the flowers grow. Well, there was activity. We had to get the people next to us to do it too, so it was social skills. So my point is that, in the everyday moments and in special toys that I'm sure your brilliant designers can make, there's a lot of room for collaboration and cooperation.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's just not only frames what the guidelines might be, but opens up all sorts. I think that's really food for thought in shorthand. And I'd like to ask Larry and Alice, not specifically about maybe what you do, but what keeps you awake at night, perhaps as a parent. I mean, what would you change in terms of the technological landscape? You know, what's nirvana in 2020 for children in terms of the virtual, what's on TV? What about, you know, what do you see, and what do you really sweat about when it comes to your kids?
Having a 30-year-old and a 6-year-old.
We'll have a little discussion later about this.
No, I think it's a good question, and interestingly enough, I think Kathy led right into it. And not when you say what keeps you up at night. Currently, what I find really engaging and what we're thinking a lot about at Cartoon are big games, where you've got that social interaction and you're using your cell phone, and it's connecting people who don't know each other, but you're playing city-wide games or region-wide games. Geocaching. What I love about what I love about how technology has evolved over the last 25 or 30 years is that it's offered us, I guess not to disagree with the data that was presented earlier, but I don't think it's isolated us. I actually think it's brought kids together. And I was curious about some of the numbers that we saw and some of the interpretation. I think when you see 4 kids standing around a computer screen playing Toontown, first it pains me because it's Disney and not us, but you know. And they're all, and I shouldn't say this, and they're all playing off one kid's account. Sorry. There's real social interaction going on there, and they are taking turns to a certain degree, although it's, you know, sometimes parent guided. But I think there's as much social stuff happening there, and it makes me feel as good as, you know, sort of 20 years ago, the board game, when you had kids sitting around playing Candyland, which is a game I hated after a while. So that I guess what I see as the potential going forward, and what I hope happens is, I hope technology becomes ubiquitous enough so that it stops being special, and it just is.
Yeah, I think, you know, we live in a very exciting time. You know, when you hear Google is distributing tool sets that used to cost millions of dollars to create, that got licensed to companies for hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, and those can go into the hands of teenagers to do things that somebody had to go get a computer science master's degree to do 10 years ago. And this stuff is all bubbling down to the youngest age, far younger than studies and psychologists are going to be comfortable, you know, even talking about. And the exciting thing for us at Kid Thing is that we're taking a lot of this stuff and putting it into a place that kids can safely go and start kind of getting their hands in and building things. And they can build new things, and they can own the new things that they build. The technology enables, or if it's used right or created right, the technology can enable enhanced social interaction, enhanced learning, enhanced creativity, and, you know, all that kind of wraps up in this bubble of kind of play. I think, I look at my daughter who's 6.5, and her job really is to play, and along the way she learns. She learns to read, she learns to build, she learns to color, she learns to write, she learns to count. Those are things that happen as a part of her play and her overall activity. As she gets older, that of course gets structured into what we call education. But the technology that exists today for a company like ours and like Cartoon Network and everybody else who's doing this is really, really amazing, and I think can power a whole transformation. The scariest thing for me, I think, as somebody who's older than the kids today, is that this is the first generation of kids who are growing up who couldn't tell you what a dial telephone is. So they are digital from the moment they're born, and they will forever be, and they have just kind of by osmosis adapted to things. We need to, as a company, and we need as researchers, to kind of figure out how to mold the tool set for them.
Yeah, I know we started late. Can we just take a couple minutes, because okay, everyone was so slow in getting back into the room, but maybe we'll open it up to a question from the audience, if that's possible. Over here? Do you need to shout? Because I don't know if we have a microphone.
Hi, I'm Scanner. I work for PBS Cyber Chase.
You got me there. Let's see. We talked about freedom, but what are some of the constraints in coding or in creating the games? You mean the philosophical constraints or the actual technological constraints?
Technological constraints.
Oh, okay. I think that's okay. Maybe just really quickly. Do you have? And does anyone want to? I think that's.
Well, I get really quickly. I can just say that you have to work within what you have, and 5 years from now, it's going to be dramatically different. But if you can build at least some of the list of things that Kathy and I were talking about into them, kids will end up using it in ways that you didn't even realize you gave them the power to. And something as simple as allowing them to draw or write a story, very open-ended, can be really powerful. And we have research documenting when kids would come back and be like a reporter and list out what they had learned from watching a particular show. And that was just a text box. So
yeah, well,
really
that's certainly the story of technology throughout history, is that, the telephone, people thought, the inventors of the telephone thought that it would be used as a business tool. They couldn't believe that people were using it in social situations. They were mainly jumping off what had happened from the telegraph, so we're always fighting the last war.
Yeah, and just leave the social aspect of it in there, because although they try to say that technology is socially isolating, I have not seen that in my own experience or in the research. In fact, in a study with kids, when we asked them what lonely kids would want to do, they either played with puzzles and things because I can do them alone, or they got on the phone and called their friends and said, meet me online at blah, 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 blah. And that they saw lonely as a state, not as a trait.
One quick question. Lisa? Can you introduce yourself? Because people should know who you are.
Hi, I'm Lisa Guernsey. I'm a writer. I write on kids, technology, and education. And it's been a really interesting panel. My question really goes to the question of how culpable Walmart and Target might be in how parents are thinking about today's toys. Because there's a story that I've told a couple times, which is that I was at a Target recently, and there was a woman with her little 2-year-old in the shopping cart going around and around and around looking for bath toys, just a rubber ducky, and she could not find a rubber ducky at Target. So I'm wondering how much, we talk a little bit about parents and what their responsibilities are, but how much of it is what's marketed to them and what channels are available to them in terms of that marketing. Thanks.
That's a great question. Kathy?
Well, thank you for raising that, because I've been to many toy companies and they tell me, well, we know that we really don't need to have the numbers and letters on the back of the infant rocking chair, but if we don't do that, it won't be put on the shelves. So I think it's a really huge problem, and I really hope that those of you who are writers will help us all address that and get the message of real play out there so that the right things do get on the shelves. The only piece I would add is that I do know that there was some movement from Target to try to get at least information out to parents. And I don't know whether that ever translated into what went on the shelves. But this whole issue of what counts as educational toys is very, very big. And I think we have to figure out what we mean by that. And I hope what we mean by that is what kids really learn from when they're active explorers, not things that merely have numbers and letters.
I'd really love to thank the panel for their... Oh, Alice.
Can I add to that? Not that I could ever add to anything Kathy says, but just to be, we vote with our wallets. And Maria Bailey's $1 Million Mom is a great book to read. It was written for companies, but as a parent, I read it and found it really interesting. If we don't buy it, it won't stay on the shelf. And when what we do buy is replaced on the shelf with something very similar. So I guess there's a dual message there. What is it that we as consumers are buying, and what message is that sending to the people who are then restocking those shelves?
Can I just
I think we should cut.
We'll fight about it later.
We can't infringe on the final panel. So I would like to thank you very, very much. I think a couple takeaways might be: it's not your parents' planet, but that doesn't mean we can't design a future that we really, truly, thoughtfully, and carefully shape in terms of our decision making? And second, who controls the mouse of life? Thank you.